Thank you so much for joining us for our 7th Empathy Hour today. It's great to have folks from all over the place. It really speaks to the diversity of our community and the global connectivity that we have at play. So why don't we go ahead and get started with the actual session. We've got a very special guest speaker with us today, Craig Kemp, who's calling in from Singapore. He'll be leading a discussion on the current state of EdTech around the world and strategies for utilizing technology to go from surviving to thriving during COVID-19. So yeah, why don't we go ahead and continue? So for those of us who are joining for the first time today, I'd love to quickly introduce the Empatico team members who have been behind bringing this initiative to life. Veronica is a program associate at Empatico, so she's involved with content and programs like our fellowships, which I know a lot of you have participated in the past. She's passionate about leveraging research findings into practical matters. So whether that's evidence-based content you used on Empatico or using evidence-based well-being practices. I'm Noah. I was a classroom teacher for 7 years. I taught for 4 years in Madrid, moved back to New York, taught middle school science here for another 3 years at a transitional bilingual school, pivoted over to Tiny Bop, where I did curriculum design with them for a year, and then joined the marketing team at Empatico about 2.5 years ago. And then Eliana works developing partnerships at Empatico. Before joining our team, she was an English teacher in Argentina and worked on a number of projects to bring authentic cultural experiences to life in the classroom. So thank you again for joining us today. With that said, I'd love to turn it over to Craig Kemp, our wonderful co-host for today, to quickly introduce himself formally and share a little bit about his background. So thanks so much for joining us, Craig.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thank you so much for having me. Working with Empatico and sharing the message of empathy has always been such a pleasure, and I really do love being a part of what you are doing. So first of all, a huge shout out to what you guys are doing each and every day. And I think back to 4 years ago when I was actually in New York City, and I came and met some of the team, and that it was the start of my vacation here from Singapore, and when I got there, it really made my whole trip. And it was something at the time, my daughter was only 2, but it was something she remembered, meeting people with funny accents, because at that stage she had no idea that there was anything different than our crazy New Zealand accent that she heard every day at home. And that made her day. And funnily enough, now she actually goes to an American international school here in Singapore and has an American twang herself. So it's always quite funny to think back on those sorts of stories. But just a really quick introduction to me. I'm a husband to my wife, Nicola, my 2 kids, Ella and Chloe. Like I said before, I just took them off to school. I'm a lover of sports, particularly cricket, basketball, and volleyball. I love traveling. I'm all about my friends and family. I do a lot of speaking and sharing, and people often think I'm an extrovert, but I'm very much an introvert. So COVID-19 has been an absolute pleasure to be locked away in my house, away from having to have commitments to go and see people. So for me, my COVID-19 has been pretty cool, actually, and I've quite enjoyed it. So it's sometimes really hard to talk to people that, a majority of people have found this really tough and have struggled. And I've got so many stories, and I'll share some of them today from my work around the world. I've been in education for more than 15 years in both teaching and public and private schools in New Zealand and Singapore, and in leadership, both as assistant principal, as director of educational technology. And I've lived in Singapore now for the past 8 years. So both of my daughters were born here. Singapore is now our home. I wouldn't say we're Singaporean. We're very much Kiwis and New Zealanders, but we call Singapore home, and we absolutely love being here. And my role now, as of the past about 13 months now, has been an educational technology consultant, working with schools and EdTech companies all over the world to help them thrive in this constantly changing landscape. So with that, let's get into it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks again for joining us, Craig. And I have to say that as a fellow introvert, what you said about having like a secret enjoyment of just being holed up at home resonates so much with me.
Yeah.
So yeah, once again, why we're here for those of us, for those of you who are joining us for the first time. So we all know that the last several months have been really crazy and intense with the public health crisis for both educators and caregivers alike and everyone else out there. So we created this virtual space to bring people together, to convene, to bring in education, EdTech experts, to talk about different topics, to support one another, to stay connected, and to continue to show empathy and to foster a sense of community.
Yeah, thanks, Noah. So today we're going to talk I'm going to talk a little bit about the current state of EdTech around the world, in my experience as a consultant working with schools and educational organizations from every corner of the globe. We'll talk ways of how to leverage EdTech to thrive in these remote classrooms. So to sort of answer that question, how are people connecting? I think we often hear the ways we're connecting, like Zoom and Google Meets, but does that mean we're actually connecting with our learners? So I sort of answer that with a question, and that's, like, what does that word connecting actually mean? And how are we really thinking about the social emotional well-being of our students? And I said in the chat before, my 6-year-old daughter, I said to her, how do you like school this year? This is their second week back at school. And she said, school is awesome. I love my teacher, but I want school to be back to normal so I can play with my friends. She's got a mask on every day, sitting by herself. That's not the way school should be. And it's not fair on our kids, but we're also aware that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. So we have to make sure we do the best that we can do in these blended environments to support our kids' social emotional well-being, but also to make sure that they're safe as well. Mm-hmm. And the last thing we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about strategies and action plans and how to make those next steps during this phase of being in the middle of COVID-19, but also future thinking to, one day soon, we're going to be through this. So I think I take a lot of positivity in going from now being in the middle of all of this to what's going to happen after all this. And one of those things is, with my daughter, planning trips for the future, like where we know we might not be able to travel until maybe even 2022, which I don't even want to think about, but sitting down with her and thinking about our next trip somewhere, even if it's a car ride somewhere, that's really cool for us to plan together, and it really brings up that, it pumps us up. So that's what we're going to do today. So let's get stuck into it here. I made a list, and I apologize for this being so wordy, but I've found in a lot of the webinars I've been running, it's much easier to just put it all out there and throw it on the screen so people who are watching back later don't have to see me clicking through multitudes of slides. It's just easier to have it all in one place. And if people want to screenshot it and take it away, it's much easier to do so. So, as a consultant, I work with schools all over the world. I'm currently working with schools in Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Australia, a school in Canada, a school in Brazil, and a school in the UK, as well as EdTech companies from all over the world as well, supporting them not only in remote learning, but also what I call going from surviving to thriving. Like, how do you create this new normal? Because as educators, we're in this unique position where we can actually create this new normal. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. But some of the things I've noticed is, as teachers in this world that we live in now, we've adapted to this change because we've had no choice. And sometimes in life, we need that moment where we're forced to do something we don't want to do to make us realize that actually we can do it, and we can do it really well. And that's sort of the phase that we've been in the past, for me anyway, in Singapore, for us in the last 6 months, because we've been at this for a long time, being one of the first countries to have cases of COVID. And, I'm lucky here, and my family in New Zealand as well, is that our countries have responded to it in an incredible way. And that makes me really proud to be involved in 2 countries that have, responded to this pandemic in a way that helps us and looks after us and really cares for us as people, and make sure that we are safe and happy and secure. The second thing that I've noticed is, particularly in the private school sector, is that there are a lot less kids in our schools. There's a lot less money to be spent in private education, and there's a lot less investment in private education, which has meant, as a result, for the first time in my educational career, is that teachers' jobs are at risk. There are less jobs to go around. And I always said, well, and my mum and dad always said this to me as well, be a teacher, not only because it's super rewarding, and my mum was a teacher, but you'll always have a job. And that was something they always said to me, there are always going to be kids that are going to need an education. Now I've been hit with this just because two of my friends have lost their jobs just because there's not enough space for them to be working in the school. So they've had to find other avenues and be creative in ways that they can support people. So we're in this unique place where, these things are changing, but we are adapting to change. One of the positive things for me is that parents are now realizing just how hard we work as teachers. For 15 plus years in education, I've never felt that parents truly understand how hard we work. And for the first time, parents have had their kids at home having to teach their kids. And for the first time, they understand just how hard it is to teach, and after years and years of media hype about how, teachers work 9 till 3 and we have it easy and we have holidays, all of a sudden that mindset's changed. And I think it's our time now to jump on that. Even though budgets are dropping, people's priorities are adapting, the focus is starting to become more on professional learning and growth and building capacity in our people. And one of the conversations I had just the other day with a thought leader from Australia, we were talking about the changing face of education and, what does disruption actually mean? Because we've talked about disruption in education for many, many years, but the action piece of that has never really come to fruition. And what I talk about now with people is we're in this unique position where we can create the new normal. It's our time to make what we want education to be for ourselves and for our colleagues and for our parents and for our kids. It's time to create that disruption, because the next 24 months are going to be action-packed, full of disruption from EdTech companies, from teachers, from leaders. And it's our job to create that. These EdTech companies have offered all sorts of products for free all over the world. And, it's a good thing, but it's also, people have been overloaded with too much stuff. And in the What is School chat I ran this morning, someone said, the best part for them about being stuck at home was the elimination of what they called fluff, that stuff around, when you're in a school, the fluff that goes around what you do. And one of the biggest frustrations from them was going back to that physical school and that fluff reappearing for no apparent reason, just because of that age-old adage of this is the way I've always done things, which for me is the most threatening piece to anything for us to make a change. So I encourage you to really think about, what's happening in your school and how you can encourage your leaders in your school to really create that new normal, because it starts with strategy and it starts with culture. And if you have those two things together, that's where change can occur. And the very last thing I want to mention here is one of the biggest things that governments and, schools all over the world have to step up to, and that's equitable access to internet and devices. Because one of the things that we've seen all over the world is what happens when our kids can't get to school. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, and this is not just third world countries either, we've seen it in some of our leading nations, is that our kids don't have access to devices. So all of a sudden they can't learn. And that's not okay. And a real quick story before I flick to the next slide. In Singapore, the government have just, I think, done one of the best things they could have done. In January, before all of this kicked off, they announced a 7-year plan by 2027 for all of secondary students to have a device provided by the government to be a one-to-one nation, to be more connected. By May, they said by the end of next year, every student from the age of 11 and up will have a device by the end of 2021. So they've not only cut that down by 6 years, but they've made a statement and a commitment to making sure that every kid in Singapore has an equal chance of being successful by learning and thriving. And I absolutely love that. And the education minister, and you can look this up online, I'm happy to share links, but the education minister said, the big part about Singapore is always offering people opportunities to be successful. And by providing them with technology, no matter what pandemic we're in, because no doubt there will be something else in the future, we give our kids an equitable access to being successful and thriving. And I absolutely love that. And this graphic really quickly sort of shows, you know, if you look at the red, this is mindsets of schools, in particular school leaders, in using technology in their schools post-COVID. You know, this is very recent. So since we've been in a pandemic, you look at the red lines here and you're looking at the different parts of the world. So red means that school leaders, because of this pandemic, they have had a decrease, that they feel that when they go back to school, they're going to use less technology. Blue lines means more technology, yellow means the same. So, you know, you look at the Middle East, and in the Middle East, right now, Dubai in particular, Dubai have said that schooling will never be the same. Kids will never be at school face-to-face for 100% of the time. They're working with 3 options right now. 20% of time remote learning, meaning 80% face-to-face, a 50-50 split, or a complete flip of that, which is like 80% online and 20% face-to-face. And they're the 3 options. They're not going to be 100% face-to-face anymore because of the supports that they can put in place and that they have the ability to give equitable access to devices. And then you look at like Oceania here, which makes me a little bit sad that 60% of schools have said, we're going to use less technology than we have before. And my opinion on the reason for this is just a really a poor approach to strategy and a lack of planning for using technology successfully. You know, if your experience with technology in your school during COVID was negative, that comes down to a lack of planning. Maybe not from you, but from your school. And a lot of the work that I'm getting right now is schools going, help. You know, never before have schools gone, help. We need help with strategy and how to be successful and be sustainable. That's now become 90% of my work, supporting schools and developing strategic plans for now and the future. And this graphic shows that. So on the next slide, this is sort of what I've noticed over the past, probably 5 months, is that I've come across 3 types of teachers. You know, those that have thrived, the 10-20% of people that have thrived, the 60 to 70% of people that have just survived. You know, they've clung on and they've held on to that ledge and they've held on by the bare minimum and scraped through. And then those that just gave up. You know, they said, this is not for me. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. And, you know, that's okay, because that actually in our schools helps us eliminate some of those people. And you all have these people in your schools. And if we flick to the next slide, we have these people in our schools who I call laggards or rock dwellers. They're the people that no matter what you do, no matter what positivity you bring, no matter what cool ideas and changes you bring, they say, this is the way I've always done things. Why should I change? Or they simply say no. You know, you say, hey, here's Empatico. You can connect your kids to kids in Asia or kids in Africa for free at the touch of a button. And they go, nah, I'm good. You know, those kids that say no, are those teachers that say, no, I'm good with that. I don't want to do that. And you're thinking in your mind right now of that teacher or those teachers. And whenever I talk about this in my workshops, people smile and people laugh and people look around awkwardly to make sure that the person that they're thinking of isn't looking at them. And I always say, don't look at those people. Don't mention those people's names. Don't be awkward about it. But every school has them. And you know, I think it's a good thing that some of these people are leaving the teaching profession, actually. And I'll be the first to put my hand up and say, you know, I don't want those people teaching my kids. You know, if you're going to be negative and not going to embrace the future, don't put yourself in a school. And I'm preaching to the converted here because you're here giving up your own time to learn and grow. And, you're one of the people that are in this early or late majority, or you're even an innovator. You're an early adopter. You're someone that just jumps at new opportunities to learn and grow. And this diffusion of innovation model really supports us in making sure we're focusing our energy on the right people in our school. Don't invest your time in the laggards, because you will give them 10% of your time and they'll drain 80% of your energy. It's just not worth it. Focus on the people that want to change, that want to grow, and want to learn. Next slide. It's this whole idea of learning, unlearning, and then relearning, because we're in this constant change now where this ability to relearn and unlearn is what we all need. Our kids need to learn that if something doesn't work, then we unlearn that and we think of a better way to solve that problem or a better way to achieve that goal. So as a learner and a leader, I challenge you, how do you embrace this? How do you change the way that we do things? And how do you embrace this culture that mistakes are okay? We encourage that with our kids all the time. And I've been doing that since I was the first time I taught nearly 20 years ago. I've been doing that with my kids, embracing mistakes. But do we do that as teachers? Do we do that as leaders? Are we transparent in what we do? And Alvin Toffler says the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and then relearn. And I'm just looking at the chat as we continue on here, and there's some cool things coming through. And as I'm just looking at those, the whole idea of failing forward, or, as Veronica said, that failing is not failure if you learn from it. And I love that. And I love the idea of, growing and moving forward. And if we go to the next slide, this is just something that I've said, I've quoted myself, and it's not really a quote, but it's just something that I've just used with a large group of schools that I've been rolling out a one-to-one device program with in Malaysia. And I put this up and I said to them, they were petrified about going to one-to-one and, moving from nothing to everything overnight. And I said to them that, digital transformation isn't about technology. Remote learning isn't about the technology. Technology is the tool that helps us be successful and grow and learn and embrace it. So actually what it means is that school leaders need to be fearless. You as a teacher need to be courageous and take those uncomfortable risks, because without taking those uncomfortable risks, we can't reimagine what the future of education is going to be. Yeah, so as we think about this, what school skills will help students flourish in tomorrow's world? So I wanted to show on the next slide this graphic that comes from the Future of Jobs report, 2018. The World Economic Forum, if we just go back one slide, sorry, that one, yep. I said graphic and there was no graphic. I'm sorry. No, I confused you. So this is the 2022 Skills Outlook. They released this in 2018 and said by 2022, these are the skills, and it's a 450-page document. So if you want to go have a read of it, you're more than welcome. But, I've taken out this 1/3 of a page snippet because I think this is the most relevant. These are the skills that our kids need to be successful. And we're not talking about our early learners here. We're not talking about primary and elementary and even middle school. We're talking about high school. The things change so quickly that it's really hard to future focus and plan. But if we focus on these skills, I think we're doing our kids a real favor in growing and developing the skills that they need. The emotional intelligence, the ability to be analytical thinkers, to think outside the square, be creative, be critical thinkers, be problem solvers. So very little of the skills in here actually say technology. My kids have to use technology. That's not the purpose here. Being an educational technology guy myself, it's actually about how you use technology and why you use technology. It's not about what you do, but it's about why you do it. Is using technology going to give your kids a significant advantage, something that they couldn't do before without technology? So a perfect example is Empatico. And I'm not just saying that because this is like the Empathy Hour with Empatico, because how before using technology could I have connected my kids to another class somewhere around the world? No chance. I couldn't have done it. I could have done, pen pals, which I did as a kid, or Flat Stanley, where I wrote on something and I posted it away. And by the end of the year, I was lucky if I got a response back. You don't need to do that anymore. I can connect, now. If I wanted to connect with my friend in, Afghanistan, who works in a real remote village supporting kids who have never had education before, and I've done this in the past few weeks, I can literally jump on a call and be on with them, whether they speak English or not. That's not the point. It's all about that connection. So these skills are really important. And the next graphic is, this is what happens in an Internet Minute, 2020 version. And I encourage you to go back and Google search, this is what happens in an Internet Minute. And you can see how this is changing and adapting over the past 6 or 7 years. And, for the purpose of education, let's ignore the Tinder version here that sort of talks about what Tinder does. Let's blank that out from our minds, but let's look at all the other areas. For every 60 seconds, every minute, 4.7 million YouTube videos are viewed. To me as an educator, I go, if our kids and our parents and our colleagues are looking at YouTube videos, why am I not using videos and media in my classroom? If this is an engaging piece of technology, why am I not using it? How can I use Instagram in my classroom? And I worked with a high school art teacher back at as an EdTech director at my old school. And she used Instagram really safely and really well to engage her high school kids in their process. And I loved the way she used it. So thinking a little bit outside the square, a lot of these things have safety issues that come with them. But these companies are also very aware now that they have to make things safe and secure for educators to use in their schools. So how can we adapt and change and app smash these things together to change the way we do things? So I encourage you to go back and take a look at this later as well. So I talked about this before, strategy plus culture equals EdTech success. Without that strategy, without that why, and truly understanding your why, we can't move forward. But before that strategy, we must have culture. We must believe in ourselves. We must believe in each other. We must have that mindset where we're willing to change, grow, and adapt, because culture eats strategy for breakfast. If you don't have culture, there's no point having a strategy, because it's not going to help you be successful. So I love the whole idea of that culture first, strategy second, to be successful third, because, without that and without them working hand in hand, we're left in limbo and we're not able to move forward. And the focus has to be on building capacity in your people. Not only that, but looking after your people, making sure that your people are well, that your people are happy, that your people are thriving. And by people, I don't just mean the teachers, but every other staff member, facilities, admin, accounts, whatever it is, those back-end people matter just as much. And then the kids, and then parents as well. We're all in this together. So once you've nailed that strategy, and I guess my question for you moving forward is, what does an EdTech strategic plan look like in your school? How do you create that plan? And that's something that I've been working on. And this is a quick little plug here for my podcast, that I talk about this all the time. This is a real selfless plug that I'm not ashamed to plug at all, because I don't make any money whatsoever from it. It's a free way that I give back. And episode 16 just launched 30 minutes ago. Actually, I just dropped it on any podcast channel, but it's called the EdTech Chat Podcast. 30 minutes every Friday for me, every Thursday evening for most of you. I drop a new episode all about why. I interview people from all over the world, specifically about technology and how technology can be used successfully in your school. And it's free and it costs you nothing. Jump on, have a listen. You can binge listen if you want. Now there's 16 episodes to catch up on. The only issue is you have to put up with 30 minutes every week of this annoying accent and sometimes not understanding what I'm talking about. But I encourage you to go take a look. I love this quote from Simon Sinek. He says, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if we skip to the next slide, Noah, Simon Sinek has this book called Start with the Why. And, you know, the whole idea of the business world as well, and leaders taking action, is it's not about what you do, it's about why you do it. So if you can't justify the use of technology, or you can't justify why you do something, don't do it. Some of the best lessons in a one-to-one school, you know, one-to-one iPad school that I've seen, have actually never used the iPads. You know, learning happens, and learning has happened without technology, but technology gives us the advantage to do more and be more. So before you use technology, ask yourself, why am I using it? Is it going to impact learning, and is it going to change the way I've done things, or can I do it without it? Because sometimes a pencil and paper is the best piece of technology that we can use. You know, it starts with the why. It allows us to think about how, and then we can implement the what. So we start from the middle of our circle and work our way out. I think just while we're waiting for some people to respond here, I'm just looking at some of these comments. You know, Joyce, hi, in the Philippines. I've worked with a lot of schools in the Philippines, and you know, I know how diverse schools are between private and public and semi-private, and the different tiers of private education. And this is probably the same in your countries as well, wherever you're listening from. You know, the whole idea of, you know, money doesn't buy happiness the same way that money doesn't buy success. You know, schools think they're going to be successful by dumping technology on people. That's not a way to be successful. You know, I mentioned earlier on in Singapore, the government are going to invest heavily in technology to be one-to-one from sort of 11 years and up. But that's not all they're doing. They're heavily investing in professional learning for their teachers and the community of learners as well. And Alyssa, you said, what's the name of the podcast? It's called the EdTech Chat Podcast. So if you go, there's a link at the bottom of all of my slides. So you'll see it in a moment. It's a Linktree link. And it's, if you go to that link, you'll see every different podcast channel in there, and you can just click straight into it. So if you listen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, the link is directly there, the EdTech Chat Podcast.
And a question from Jesse, if WhatsApp would be considered an EdTech tool. Craig, I don't know if you want to jump in on that.
Absolutely. I'm happy. I saw that as well. I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, I think WhatsApp is a tool. You know, it just worries me sometimes how WhatsApp is used, and can we ensure the safety and security of tools like WhatsApp? I know in my last school, we didn't use WhatsApp, and it was actually not encouraged. But I know in some schools, actually one of the schools I was working with in the Philippines uses WhatsApp incredibly well, because that's one of the only tools that they had to be successful. So I think you use what you have, and you use that really well. And just looking at some of the other tools being mentioned here, you know, Seesaw has been a game changer for me as a parent, being able to see what's happening. You know, Seesaw is phenomenal. Flipgrid. I've been supporting some schools in their use of a tool called Education Perfect. And I'll put the link here to that in the chat feature, which is really focused on helping teachers save time and be successful in doing that. So I'll make sure that link's in here. Yeah, so, you know, Dexter Yeager says you'll never leave where you are until you decide where you'd rather be. And that's where we've found ourselves right now. You know, we're in this huge change. So how do we move from surviving to thriving? So, you know, this is one of the main ways, is developing that strategic plan, you know, building that culture and developing that strategic plan. So how do we do that successfully? You know, well, what we do is establish EdTech strategic plans. And these are just some photos of some of the work that I did with schools prior to, you know, not being allowed to be in schools and travel anymore. But on the left is working with some schools in New South Wales and Australia, with some Post-it notes from teachers and kids about, you know, how do they feel about using technology in their school? You know, it's about getting voice from our people and truly listening but embracing that. In the middle at the top there, you see some of the work I'm doing with the school group that I was talking about in Malaysia, and embracing the use of being in a one-to-one device program and actually being hands-on with learning as part of the strategic plan. At the bottom, you see a school that I worked with, also in Malaysia, but a different schools group. And this is actually them, the first time we revealed it, but this is their strategic plan for educational technology that's painted on a wall and was painted by their high school kids. And they talked about how they moved to a position where they are, you know, futuristic and embracing change. And this is what it was all about. And this was a 6-month process that we wanted it to be permanently put up into a space where people found it everywhere they looked. And on the right is what it looks like when we put that strategic plan on paper. You know, this is an example in a school in Melbourne, in Australia, that we co-created the strategic plan together. So there's all sorts of ways that we can do things in the world we live in, but implementing it is often really hard. So, you know, how do we move now to actually doing this? So how do we actually embrace this? And now if you go to the next slide, I think it starts with building capacity. I think it starts with making sure that we look after our people. And I think these are the ways that we can do that. You know, ways that we can do this without necessarily spending money. You know, staying relevant doesn't mean building and buying and embracing the latest and greatest things. What it actually means is being connected and learning and growing. And just here in the chat, I've seen 12, 15 different tools that people are using to be successful. And even if one of you takes one of these tools and tries it out, being involved in that learning opportunity is seeking that opportunity to learn. You know, you're here today, staying relevant, but seeking out ways to learn. And unfortunately, not all of your colleagues are doing that, but I think it's your duty to take this and share this stuff on. You know, be that person that's happy to share and help others and bring them along on this journey. You know, you can create that opportunity for learning for others, you know, building that PLN or personal or professional learning network. My go-to is Twitter. You know, I connect and engage, and I'm connected with 40,000 or more educators from every corner of the globe. And I take so much from that. I can be on Twitter for 5 minutes and learn more than I can from an hour-long webinar with a guy from New Zealand speaking in an accent I've never heard before, you know? And it's a weird thing for me to say when I'm in the middle of an hour-long webinar, and I love doing this, but, you know, I actually myself learn and grow so much more from being a self-directed learner, and I do that on Twitter. And that's the way I learn and I grow. And I don't often myself jump on as a learner to webinars like this, and this is me being totally transparent and open, because that's the way I think is really important for us to move and grow forward. It's about knowing how you learn best. What do you do to embrace this change? Because at the end of the day, your school, your district, they're not going to hand things to you on a silver platter. You have to embrace and take it on yourself, because it starts with you. So next slide, please, Noah. And, you know, this is the last thing, and Noah, you're going to have to click through these as well, because I've done the thing where I've put like 20 slides so that one thing comes up. So as we finish up here, I want you to remember this. We're the last generation to understand life before the internet. The last generation to understand life before a smartphone. You know, we're the last generation to understand how to connect, truly connect, without using social media. We're the last generation to be fluent translators of what it was like before and now after technology was a thing. And for some of us, and for some of you here today, maybe even you were not present with technology, life before technology. You know, when I was a kid at high school, we were getting computers in our library, and that was huge. You know, and we totally abused the power of having technology. You know, I think back to the stupid things that I did as a kid at high school with those devices, and I did not use them the way I should have used them. So think back to what it was like before technology. Our kids don't have that. You know, all that they have is what life was like after technology. You know, this is something I'm guilty of. We're the last generation to wonder each morning, what should I do, instead of wondering what you missed. You know, I wake up every morning. This morning I did it. I woke up and I picked up my phone and I looked at all of my notifications. You know, instead of opening up, like rolling over and going, what am I going to do today? You know, the good old days of where I didn't have a smartphone. I just rolled around on my bicycle to my friend's house and said, hey, do you want to go play basketball? Or, you know, called up on the old school telephone and called my mate and said, hey, let's go play outside, or let's go do something. You know, we don't have that anymore. So how do we embrace that in this world we live in? You know, we have to plan with the future in mind. Be strategic, but know your why. Build your culture and stay ahead of the game. Because the reality is, if you don't do that, you will be left behind. Help people do that. Help people support other people in your community. But more importantly, be a little bit selfish. You know, help yourself grow and learn so that you can help others grow and learn. Again, this is the podcast. The link is at the bottom below, linktree/Mr. Kemp NZ. You'll get all of my social channels. I think the next slide is potentially, if I remember right, all of my connections. No, maybe it's the one after, which we can get to after. Anyway, no, don't worry about it now. I think we get to it eventually.
Feel free to continue the conversation using the Empathy Hour hashtag. We'll follow up with more information soon on a date for the next Empathy Hour. Here's Craig's contact information if you'd like to keep in touch with Craig. And then our contact information if you'd like to keep in touch with us, and the list of resources, which I think you mentioned, Craig.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, once again, we'll plan to share this deck out to anyone who is present today, anyone who registered. We'll share the recording out as well. Huge thank you to you, Craig, for joining us today. Well, tonight for us, morning for you. Yeah, we really appreciate having you share your expertise and share your thoughts. Yeah, I guess unless anyone has any last questions in the chat box.
Thanks. Just really quickly, thanks, Noah. Thanks, Eliana. Thanks, Veronica. Thank you, everyone, for being a part of this. I know this is going to be put up on YouTube, so I encourage you to share it with people as well, and make sure that other people can connect, learn, and grow. You know, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help, learn, and grow. And I wanted to finish by really quickly quoting and taking a screenshot of what Darcy Knight just said, because I never hear this. She said, your accent is gorgeous, and I'm going to take that. And that's going to make my day. So thanks, Darcy. Even though you probably just listened for the last 60 minutes and not understood a word that I've said, that's made my day. And I'm about to have the next 12 hours of joy and happiness thanks to that comment. So thanks, everyone. Stay connected, and thanks for being here.